If you've been studying for the NCMHCE and you're looking at the questions and going, a lot of these sound right, or I would do all of these in real life, you are not alone in that. In this video, I'm breaking down the most common mistakes I see people make when they're preparing for this test. Hi, I'm BC. I'm a licensed therapist and I help people pass the National Clinical Mental Health Counseling exam. Honestly, I took the test 3 years ago, and even still, when I'm looking at these questions, there's times where I would do all of those in real life and be fine. Or I would look at the correct answer and think, I would never do that with a real client. They're trying to make it real life, but it's a standardized test. There's only so much they can really do. Which means when it comes to this test, I want you to be really careful to not feel like you're a bad therapist if you're not getting the questions correct. Because what you really need to be focusing on is how to approach the exam in a different way. A lot of these might seem really small, but it's probably costing you a lot of points and can be the difference between you passing and not. So let's get into it. I'm going to break down these common mistakes into 5 categories. The first one is reading mistakes. The things that you're doing when you're reading the actual content that could be messing you up. The second one is strategy mistakes. So learning how to think the way the test is and answer in the correct way. The third is clinical mistakes, because there are some things that just need to be done in a certain way for this particular exam. The fourth is content mistakes. This test isn't really about memorization, but there are some things you just need to know to be successful in. And the final thing is mindset mistakes. Sometimes the way we're approaching this test or talking to ourselves can play a big role in our success. So, section 1, reading mistakes. One of the biggest things I see people do is that they're not reading the test the way you should. Other people may have their own opinions about this, but I am team read the whole thing. So often I see people skimming or skipping stuff and then wondering why they're not getting things correct. But a lot of times the correct answers are in those little details that you ignore. Mistake 2 is reading too fast. I would rather you go more slowly up front, make sure you're catching the key information right at the gate, than to have you speed through it and then not recall anything later. Mistake number 3 is not reading the demographics. At the top of each narrative is the demographics about the client. You do want to read all of it. I would say there's 4 areas to really pay attention to. They are the clinical issues, which could also be called the presenting problem, the provisional diagnosis, the modality, and the location. Those will be your best friends. And number 4 is we're missing key words in the actual questions themselves. Things like best, most, least, and not. Those might seem simple, but I promise you, they can change the entire direction of that question if you've missed it. The 5th mistake is making assumptions. We have to take this test at face value. If you're noticing gaps in the story or feeling like you have more questions that you wish you had more insight on, it's for a reason. Don't try to fill in the gaps or try to think through later responses. We have to answer what the question is asking us right now. I know that's hard as therapists because a large part of our job is to see how what the client is saying is connected to other things they may be experiencing, but don't do that on this test. Section 2, the test strategy mistake. This is where a lot of people can miss points even if they read carefully. So the first one over here is to pay attention to the session number. This can actually play a lot bigger role than you may expect. I like to say that when we're in the first 4 sessions, we're building rapport. So things like psychoeducation, exploring questions, validating, normalizing, building trust in the therapeutic relationship. After you've made it to 5, then you can start to get more direct with your techniques by doing things like confrontation or giving homework, role playing. But for the first 4, keep it focused on rapport. The next mistake is not answering both parts of the question. Sometimes they give us these chunky paragraphs as a question, and we can get into the habit of just focusing on the piece at the end as the question. But some of these questions have two parts or multiple things that they want us to consider. So be careful with those. And another thing I see people do as a mistake is just going with an answer because it's long. I'll give it to you. Sometimes the long answers are correct, but don't default to doing that, because just because it's long does not mean it's right. And more often than not, sometimes they throw in a word or two there that would mess up an otherwise good answer choice. Category 3, clinical mistakes. This is a big one. Safety first, always. Always, 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 always. Safety first. When I'm talking about safety, I mean suicidal ideation, homicidal ideation, physical aggression, physical well-being in terms of health. All of those things need to be addressed first. Even if there's some other things going on that may seem more related to why the client is here, we gotta focus on the safety. The next mistake is ignoring the mental status exam. The MSC is usually in the general information section of the narrative. And whenever we've got a lot of chunky stuff happening in that story, I like to refer back to the mental status exam, because that's gonna give us a nice little brief picture of what's happening, especially in terms of suicidality and homicidality. So don't be afraid to refer back to the MSC as needed. The next thing in this category is supervision. When in doubt, supervision is going to be the first one to go with. If you're not sure how to respond, we're looking at that supervision piece. But you still have to make sure the rest of the answer makes sense. So let's say the question says that you're in the middle of a session and the client asks you about your practice's protocol for confidentiality. If you don't know it in the moment, there could be an answer choice that says, ask your supervisor to come in session and to explain it. That doesn't make sense. Like, having the supervisor come into the session to explain it right then and there isn't really logical. And so if that question said, what should you do next? A better answer would be to say, you'll find out and let them know. But having the supervisor immediately come in for a non-emergent situation isn't going to be the next thing to do. So that would be an instance where supervision isn't necessarily the best answer. But in general, the first thing to go with is your supervisor, then consultation with colleagues, and after that, you've got two options. If the thing you're struggling with is personal, you want to go with therapy. If it's professional, you might need to do a training. This next category is the content gaps. So actually knowing the information you're being tested on. Mistake number 1 for this category is not knowing your theories. Theories makes up 30% of this exam. You do not want to skip out on the theories. I do have a theory study guide that helps you focus on what's most worth it when it comes to the theories. But please just know theories is not the place to cut corners. Second mistake is about the diagnoses. These make up 25% of the exam. You want to know the key symptom, the thing that sets apart this diagnosis from all of the other ones, and know your differentials. This test loves their differentials, so please make sure you're familiar with them. This next one is something I hadn't even heard of until I was preparing for the exam myself, but you really want to know the cultural formulation interview, or the CFI. This test loves that thing. 9 times out of 10, if you've got a question that's talking about culture in some way, the correct answer is going to be the CFI. And then the final mistake in this section is not factoring in the developmental level of your client. With kids, make sure you're doing play therapy, where you're engaging in things that they love to do. With adults, still see if they've got any developmental concerns, but factor that in when you're thinking about how to respond to the client. And then the final category is mindset mistakes. The things going in our head that can really throw us off. Number 1, please go with your gut. Please don't second guess yourself. I tell my tutoring clients all the time, I would rather you go with your gut. Maybe we get it wrong and we have to talk about it a little bit, than for you to second guess yourself, spend a bunch of time going back and forth, and talk yourself out of the correct answer. Go with your gut. The next thing is watch how you're talking to yourself with this thing. Like if you are just beating yourself up, saying you're making dumb mistakes, saying that you're never going to be a licensed therapist, that's really heavy and it's going to carry with you into all of your studying and to your exam. Your word choices matter, so please be intentional with that. And then finally, every time you think about this test, I want you to remember that it's not determining if you're a good therapist or not. It doesn't know what your rapport with your real clients are like. It doesn't know how you remember the details about your client, even if it was mentioned previously, or how you're always in supervision, wanting to learn more and to continue to grow to show up better for your client. This test is just about how you're reading the questions, thinking like the textbook answer, almost as if you're in school again and you're trying to do things the right way, and how you're responding to clinical in the moment pressures, whether they're realistic or not. So if you're watching these and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been doing a lot of these, I didn't even notice. That's okay. That's okay. I hope more than anything you realize you're not alone, because some of these mistakes I still kind of do myself when I'm doing narratives to stay sharp. So give yourself some grace there first. But also keep in mind that some of these things, although they may seem small, could be what's keeping you from passing the test. And this is exactly what I help people do in tutoring. We're looking for these patterns. We're looking to see what are they consistently doing and breaking it down so that it's more manageable and you're able to think like the exam. If you want some help with that, I'll put the link to my services in the description box. And if this was helpful, make sure you save it, share it with a friend, or leave a comment below, because more than anything, I want to give you the resources I wish I had when I was preparing for this test. So I would love to answer any questions you may have and help you make the next step to becoming a licensed therapist.